Order. Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, she's a former National Party candidate and current talkback host on Māori radio, the ever wonderful Claudette Hauiti. And he is an author, a columnist and political commentator, proof that the revolution will be televised, blogger Chris Trotter. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, how do we get affordable housing in Auckland? Is the government on the right track, and should the super city open up more land? Issue 2, can the Māori Party convince Pākehā to vote for them? And issue 3, what does the latest Roy Morgan poll mean for David Shearer at this month's Labour Party conference in Auckland? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. The government's affordable housing package has been received with scepticism throughout the political spectrum, leading to many suggesting the government is grasping for straws. Claudette, how does this work for affordable families? How can first-time homeowners get into the market under this plan?
It's really difficult under this plan and previous plans. I had the opportunity to talk to Major Campbell Roberts from the Salvation Army at the beginning of the week, and he said it's extraordinarily hard for those who are low-income, no-income families, let alone middle-income families. And yes, he said, while the government has insisted that local councils open up land for housing, it's a long-term measure and the need is critical right now at this point in time, and there is no short-term policy or plan that assists his families who are at the critical phase. Good in the long term, but right now is where the real big problem, where the real issue is.
It's smart politics, isn't it? I mean, affordability of houses is a big issue now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, and it's quite ironic because we have a glut of inner city apartments here in Auckland, but in South Auckland where I live, there is, you know, it is absolutely, you know, we're jam-packed in South Auckland. There is very little housing. Some of the houses that are in the private stock is substandard as well too. So we're at a really critical point, particularly in Auckland, and we're going to grow. And the issue's going to get worse.
Gareth Morgan says the issue of housing affordability is a false demand from New Zealanders property speculating. Do you think he's correct?
A false demand for the... Well, you see, I don't know whether it's false demand, but that's that property speculation is as a result of our, you know, long-term investment policy. We've never ever been divergent in how we invest our money in old age and readiness for old age. It's always been in the property market. So false economy, you know, I can't answer that. I'm not an expert.
If Gareth is right, do we need a capital gains tax on every property other than your home to truly tackle the problem long term?
No, I don't think a capital gains tax is going to really solve this problem, certainly not in the short term. The reason people buy second or third properties is because you can make a lot of money doing so, because the potential to charge high rents is there because the demand is there and the supply is limited. What the first Labour government did, and even before them, the government of Gordon Coates did, was take the responsibility for meeting that pent-up demand on the shoulders of the state. And when you think about it, only the state can do this. States are immortal. Property developers, thankfully, are not. And so you look at the first Labour government state housing program, they achieved a huge number of objectives, of course, by building literally thousands of homes. They put people to work building them. They put factories to work making the timber and the bakelite and the tiles and then all the fittings. It was a huge Keynesian pump priming exercise, but also because they were their houses and because they could quite easily subsidise the tenants that they were taking in, it meant that you had a fixed percentage of people's incomes going in rent. 25% was the maximum that people could pay for a state house tenancy. Now that, of course, met the demand. The amount of money that private landlords could charge for their rents was forced downwards because there was a vast expansion of the number of rental properties. Now, if you can't get a very lucrative return from your second or third property, you stop buying your second and third properties, in which case the pressure on the housing market is relieved, and so the prices come down. I mean, the answer is for the state or for the local authority, as is the case in places overseas, like Sweden or Denmark, to actually meet the demand in a low-cost way, which drives down rentals, which drives down demand for housing.
Claudette, Auckland Central has a lack of 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, and public transport hasn't had the investment to make carless life easy. If councils want New Zealanders to give up the quarter-acre dream for denser urban communities, what do they need to do to start making that transition much more attractive for people living in much more densely populated urban areas?
Well, there was a time in the 90s and early 2000 where they had excess of apartment building development in the inner city, and they were 50 square metres, 40 to 50 square metre apartments, and they were primarily targeted at the student, the incoming student.
That's right.
Boom, but then it kind of went bust, and so they were left with empty apartments, plus they were left with apartments that were also very leaky, and so there's a big glut of those at the moment. And yes, really, Auckland particularly has not seen the type of demographic and the type of families that are growing, particularly out in South Auckland and West Auckland. We're talking big families. So the new stock of houses that are coming into South Auckland, for instance, are your 6-beddies because they're very large families. So in terms of the council, I mean, I absolutely agree with Chris. I think that it should go back to the state to meet the demand in the first instance, and also to put around that trade training scheme. My cousins came down for chippies and they worked on the state houses.
That's right.
And they were builders and they got
way,
qualifications.
They've been forced to do it again this time in Christchurch for the rebuild. Just today, the government announced that it was going to set up the scheme of trade training and guaranteed work. I mean, only the state in New Zealand has ever had the resources, really. I mean, I suppose in countries where there were millions of people and billions of pounds or dollars in capital lying around looking for a place to invest, it was possible for the private sector to take up a lot of this slack. But in New Zealand, from the very first boats that arrived here, bearing Pākehā civilization with them, the state has always had to become the backstop, because capitalism in a colonial setting is too weak to take on these responsibilities, which is why someone like Gordon Coates, who was a reform prime minister, supposedly a conservative, he actually began the creation of what later became state houses for railway workers.
Final question of both of you on this then. The price of home ownership has been driven from twice the average household income to 6 times the average household income. Do you think home ownership for the next generation of New Zealanders is now just out of grasp, just out of reach?
Well, it appears to be at this point in time, but it doesn't have to be that way going forward. Absolutely. And I just want to go back to the state housing example. My family were the families that, Chris had talked about earlier. They came into the state houses, and it was my baby benefit that assisted my parents to get by the state house. And so we hear that the national government has said that it is no longer state house for life. Well, it actually can be if they were assisted into that property and then assisted to purchase that property. So we can actually go back to that ideology. We can go back to that type of New Zealand where it was a state house for life. But I do think that the state needs to recognise and pick up that demand.
Is home ownership out of reach for the next generation?
It will be, unless something very dramatic is done, and that's going to take political will to do that. But I mean, in addition to the state houses, which met that first demand from those most in need, If you look at the post-war period, where the suburbs of New Zealand, were created and sprawled all around the major centres. I mean, these were the Beasley homes, these were the Keith Hay homes. The whole structure was led by the state. Finance was guaranteed by the state. 2 or 3% state advances loans were available to people to move them from state tenancy or private tenancy into home ownership. But the whole thing was geared towards keeping the prices as low as possible.
Kelston was built that way, Massey was built that way, you know, parts of Mangere were built that way with Keith Hay homes and Beasley homes and Sabritsky homes as well too in the 70s. So yes, those suburbs were built by those building entities, but also too, going back to my cousins, they worked for those people.
Yeah,
You
so
know, they came
payoff.
down, absolutely.
Yeah.
It has job creation
That's right.
and it gives people an opportunity to purchase.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2, the Māori Party conference last weekend raised more questions than they answered. Suggestions of a name change, wanting to get Pākehā to vote for them, and no clear pathway to the next leadership, all led to a convention that was a little bit odd. Chris, Mana appeals to Pākehā through the spectrum of class. Can the Māori Party appeal to them that way as well?
Well, yes, that's open to them, although it's difficult to see where the Māori Party can go apart from where it already is, to be honest. It's called itself the Māori Party for a reason. There was initially the actions of Helen Clark's government in relation to the foreshore and seabed, which precipitated Tariana Turia's departure from the Labour Party and the creation of the Māori Party, and its great intent and its prime objective was to repeal that legislation, which they regarded as another raupatu. So it had a vision, it had a goal. Now, what does a party that is created out of a specific set of circumstances to redress a specific wrong do once it's actually redressed that wrong?
Sure.
I mean, I was involved with the creation of the new Labour Party and watched closely the development of the alliance. Its leader, Jim Anderton, in my opinion, only ever had one goal: to draw Labour back from the clutches of the far right, to make it return to being a centre-left political party. Once that was achieved, and he did achieve that, because our Labour Party, for all its faults, is not the Australian Labour Party, certainly not the British Labour Party, or the Bill Clinton's Democratic Party. It's still recognisably a Labour Party, just. And once he had achieved that objective, really, I don't think he had any more.
Right.
And the alliance kind of slowly faded, divided, faded further, and then disappeared. I can't see any real alternative to the Māori Party except that.
Claudette, Peter Sharples was critical of Pākehā standing for mana, being able to represent Māori views in the election last year. Could the Māori Party represent Pākehā views politically?
Well, talking to the party president, Pen Bird, said that the Pākehā, that they will invite Pākehā if they're interested to join the party and then perhaps seek election. It's not about, you know, who best represents, you know, can Māori speak for Pākehā, can Pākehā speak for Māori. And the Māori Party are more about who speaks, you know, on a particular issue, and that's what the Māori Party was about. In terms of the left, right, centre, if you look at the Māori Party, and the Mana Party actually, they don't see themselves in the Pākehā context, Pākehā construct of left, centre, right. They do see themselves very much as issues based. So while the Māori Party may, when they started, seemed to be far left, and now they are centre left, centre right, they're actually about economic development, social and economic development for Māori. And how are you going to best do that? Well, you're going to align yourself with parties that perhaps have policies on the left. Then they're going to align themselves with parties that have policies that are to the right, like the National Party. So that makes them look like they're a little bit of, you know, ship jumpers, you know, waka jumpers, because they're all over the place. But in actual fact, it's where the best deal is for Māori, social and economic development, and that's why the Māori Party is very well placed where it is at the moment.
Is that a fair dynamic? I mean, the Labour Party have not done the Māori Party many favours, have they, in the past?
Oh, I think the animosity that Tariana Turia particularly still feels towards the Labour Party will forever preclude a relationship between those two parties while Tariana is part of the leadership group.
Yep.
I hear what you're saying, Claudette, but I think politically that sort of behaviour doesn't have a long-term prospect for anybody other than the likes of Peter Dunn. Peter Dunn is entrenched in Hauiti and is able to play that game of, you know, when the chips fall Labour's way, he goes with Labour. When the chips fall National's way, he goes with National. I suppose people could say that the Maori Party have a kind of lock on at least, you know, half of the Maori seats, or nearly half, and so long as that continues, then they will be in a position to do as Peter Dunn has done. But I think so long as Tariana's there, it'll always be a National Party, Maori Party dynamic. And if Tariana and Peter aren't there, I seriously wonder whether they will hold the Maori seats, particularly with mana breathing down their necks.
How much of this is an issue for the Māori Party of the leadership transition? I mean, with Pita and Tariana now saying they want to stay pretty much until New Zealand's smoke-free, that doesn't leave much of an opportunity for Mr. Flavel to come forward, does it?
No, and once again, parties that are built around a specific set of political events and attract charismatic figures at their birth, as the Maori Party did in Tariana and Pita. It's very hard to see how they can manage the succession successfully. While Hone was in the tent, I think there was a natural successor to those two older leaders.
Yep.
With Hone out of the tent, it seems less and less likely.
Right. Yeah. Claudette, what does the Māori Party need to do to solidify its position? I mean, will it be a sub 5% threshold strategy to boost the list vote while retaining a handful of Māori seats? Is that where they're going now?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that you need to look at in terms of Māori and politics is there is a difference between Māori politics and, you know, Pākehā politics. And as we have more treaty settlements and as the tribes are becoming more solidified, you're getting a, you know, a fraction, you know, the Māori groups are becoming fractionalised into iwi groups, and they are building themselves economically. Yeah. And so, as a result, though, that is going to be the strength behind the Māori Party, as opposed to the Mana Party. But underneath that iwi tribal structure down at the whānau level will be those that will always support the Mana movement. And so when you have, and we are, you know, we're great supporters of charismatic leaders, you know, Te Whiti, Te Kōti, you know, Te Puia, you know, we follow charismatic leaders. And so, you know, Tariana Turia will call a hui, turn up. Peter will call a hui, turn up. Hone Harawira, call a hui, turn up. Who's the next ones after those three in terms of, for the Mana Party, it's the Pōpata brothers, but who there is with the Māori Party after Peter and Tariana?
Quick question to both of you. 55% of Māori are on the Māori roll, 45% on the general roll. Next year there is a decision on whether or not the 6th seat is gained. Do you think they'll get a 6th seat, 6th Māori seat?
Oh, they may, although I remember the last time this...
It's just short.
Yeah, this process got underway. The Māori Party was very disappointed with the outcome. You know, Māoridom has had this bifurcated political status for a long time. There was a New Zealand group that participated in the International Study of Values, which was a big, longitudinal study of political and social views. And always in those studies, the answer to the question, do you identify primarily as Maori or primarily as a New Zealander, split Māoridom almost 50-50.
Right.
50% said they identified first and foremost as Maori. 50% said they identified first and foremost as New Zealanders. And this is something I think both Mana and the Maori Party really have to bear in mind. That there are a large number of Maori in New Zealand whose identification is not primarily with their tribal origins or even with their cultural antecedents. Their focus is towards the future, towards getting their kids as educated as they possibly can be to participate in a global world.
Do you think a sixth Māori seat?
Huge strategical error for them not to go after the party vote, and they've learnt that, you see. And so I'm wondering who their strategists are. You know, they really need to get some really good political strategists. And I'm sorry, Matthew Jensen may not be the, you know, the type of mind that they really need. You know,
Bad choice, I
It was an interesting TV coverage. There wasn't
the
a lot of angry Māori sitting there.
The expressions on the faces, the body language was not
Not
encouraging.
positive.
But you
was
see,
it?
one of those up-and-coming leaders is actually a young woman called Dr. Kapua Smith. And you see, she was the highest-ranked new candidate on the Māori list. And if they had gone after that party vote, then she would have been up.
Yes.
You see,
You know,
and she's 30-something. You
You
know,
know,
so
one of the possible
longevity.
outcomes, particularly with this constitutional review, which is quietly percolating away, is that in future, particularly with the growth of iwi corporates, we may in the end see a second chamber in New Zealand.
That's right. That's right.
And the second chamber will be comprised of the leaders of iwi, as well as perhaps leaders from the Pākehā community, not elected, but perhaps reflecting industry,
Well, you're seeing that with the iwi leaders group now, aren't you? The starting of that, you know,
you can
starting
begin to
emerge.
see that the way the government is turning to the leaders
Over the
of
Māori
the
Council.
various tribal groupings over the sale of the energy companies, and I just think that may be something which emerges in the future.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. What does the latest Roy Morgan poll mean for David Shearer at this month's Labour Party conference in Auckland? Chris, Labour slipped 4.5%. That can't bode well for Shearer leading into the national conference this month, can it?
Well, he would have welcomed something a little better than that, I think. Certainly positive numbers rather than negative ones politicians are looking for. It's only one poll, which, you know, we have to stress. And I see that Anthony Robbins has produced his, or is it Rob Sarmond? I think it might be Rob Sarmond, the political scientist based in the United States. He has a poll on polls on the pundit blog site.
That's right.
And, you know, Labour's gone up. There's no doubt about it, slowly and steadily. National's coming down slowly but steadily. The Greens are holding their own.
But 4.5 is 4.5.
It's still not the headline he was looking for. But, you know, you've got to look at that conference and the way it has been structured. David Shearer makes his appearance, guess when? It's the last thing. Now, if you're really confident in your leader's ability to get the troops up and running, you put them on first. You don't put them on last.
Claudette, why isn't Shearer making the impact on Labour Party supporters?
Well, you know, he's a good man, and he's got lots of heart, and he is a one-on-one kanohi kite kanohi person, you know, and Māoris love that. But in terms of, you know, that charismatic, you know, drawing, he kind of lacks that āhua, that, you know, that sort of like draws in people. That's really important actually when it comes to the community grassroots, working class people, Māori people, Pacifica people. You really do need that. And so, but I think that that's what Labour had thought that he would be, you know, the come to me, you know, tall, big man, big heart, been there, worked with overseas people that were
Great
on
backstory, great backstory.
Great backstory, you know, but it just didn't, and maybe that's because of his political naivety or his inexperience, not naivety, but his inexperience, but also too, I think it goes back to the strategists around him as well too, to be able to create a situation for him where he can be seen to be himself at a great height, you know, and create another situation for him to go
Question
to.
to both of you. What are the possibilities of a leadership challenge, or does Shearer lead Labour into 2014?
It all depends what happens at the conference.
Yep.
Because the rules are up for quite dramatic change.
Yes.
And if they are changed to give the rank and file more say, then I think the challenges to Mr. Shearer will probably get busy. But if the rules remain
That he's safe.
weighted in his favour.
Yeah, he's safe.
He's safe, I would say,
Right.
yes.
Chance of a coup?
Well, you know, Labor's going to have to do something, and this is a really good time for them to do it. In actual fact, they shouldn't leave it any later. If there's going to be a coup, they've got to do it now. If they're going to bed down with this leader, then they've got to do it now, and then be united, and you know, come out of the room, the war room, a united front, regardless of whether they scrap it or not. Inside, come out, you know, all squared up, so that their followers can, you know, get them behind them.
Can Shearer win?
No.
Can Shearer win?
Well, I think I would like to see the Labor supporters win on this one.
That's a great
diplomatic
answer. That's very diplomatic. Let's wrap this show with a final word. Claudette, your final word this weekend.
Yes, well, last night my children participated in the Auckland Kapahaka Primary Schools Festival, and, you know, over 5,000 kids from primary schools all around Auckland went to compete at this kapahaka. And, you know, the ihi and the wehi and the wana of these children in performing, because they were speaking their reo, they were performing in their tikanga to Māori who appreciated, could understand their tikanga, and, you know, other participants and spectators as well too. I think that if we can just harness that ihi and that wana, and get that and encapsulate that in the rest of their schooling, community and life, we would be a lot more vibrant in our education system, and our children would be able to prosper. Because unfortunately, even though I hear that we are such a successful educational system in New Zealand, 20%, 25% are those kiddies that were in that hall were the failures. But last night, they were in the top 1 percentile of success.
Chris, your final word this week.
2 events, one to come, an event in Auckland here on Saturday, the Kirk legacy. I mean, many years now since Norman Kirk died.
You'll be speaking at that?
I'm participating
Excellent.
in that, and last night an event, the Bruce Jesson Memorial Lecture. The speaker was Nikki Hager. A very, very well considered address, and deserves to be more widely read. You can find it on the Bruce Jesson website. I'll
be posting that on Tumiki a little bit later this week. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Claudette. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, let's be very clear that the next round of industrial laws are nothing short of an ideological attack on working people, in the exact same vein of triumphalism that saw National and ACT kill off compulsory student union membership, weakening unions even further as social madness. When you look at our current soaring inequality rates, unions are the only effective mechanism to force wages up. When they are weak, social inequality is the result. We need to be strengthening unions now, not removing the few teeth they have left remaining. Allowing the boss to walk away from negotiations makes good faith bargaining more faith than good. If Ports of Auckland could have walked away from the table and sacked everyone, they would have by now. They are forced to the table by the process. If these new laws pass, every boss can waltz through negotiations with every intention of walking away at the first possible opportunity. Restricting union access to workplaces is a further strangulation of unions' ability to recruit members. It's a naked attempt at killing off membership altogether. New Zealand was recently ranked 3rd by the World Bank for ease of doing business, so any claim by employers that restrictive unions are crushing entrepreneurial free spirits is simply the warped imagination of hard right mythology. With the 90-day right to sack and slave youth rates, bosses have more power and more ability to misuse that power than ever before. To hand them even more power makes the process of negotiation utterly one-sided and blatantly anti-worker. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber and Twitter Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand.